Mundo.
Okay. Um, Welcome everybody. Today we're going to have the honor of listening and learning from Mark Temple-Roston. Mark is long time ago, former colleague of mine. Uh, we used to work together at Citigroup. Uh, anyway, he's got an advanced degree in mathematics and physics. He's a PhD from Cambridge. And we can do a trivia quiz at the end. If you can guess who his PhD mentor was, we'll send you a book. Uh, anyway, Mark is what I call a true rocket scientist. When I first met him, he told me his first job was working for Hughes, the instrument and satellite company out in California, helping them build guidance systems for the satellites. So when you mention a rocket scientist, he's a true rocket scientist. Anyway, today he's going to talk to us about scientific machine learning for forecasting and strategy, which is what the company that he's co-founded specializes in, which is being able to use real data, no statistical sampling, and machine learning to help you forecast and strategy in many areas. Their bread and butter business currently is with hedge funds, but their plans are to expand into the banking and insurance companies. Um, and in terms of questions and answer, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll monitor the chat and periodically we'll interrupt Mark and answer your questions. Mark, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll just mention that actually, Edmundo was my mentor at Citigroup, so it was more than just working with him. I worked for him.
Mark,
Pardon me?
sorry to interrupt you, but we
Yes.
have a winner already. Charles Nunu, guess who your PhD mentor was?
So Stephen Hawking. Good. That's great. That didn't take long. So I think there's been one really unmitigated success in AI right now that I think we can probably all agree with, and I certainly think is amazing is machine learning. And now this is almost 20 years old now, and the first Netflix contest was 2006. So it's about 20 years, and it's come, and it made huge waves, right? If you look um, at Wikipedia, for instance, for machine learning, you'll see there are a huge number of business applications, successful business applications. That's currently what we're missing in other forms of AI, is really making that connection to business value. I think machine learning has done that convincingly, right? But what we don't have for machine learning is a scientific justification for why machine learning should work. In fact, and without that scientific justification, it obscures the scope of what machine learning can do. Are we really required to only look at pattern recognition? Can't we do more than that? So this is what a scientific machine learning would give us, would allow us to see more clearly what the possibilities are for machine learning. And I believe if we do that, a scientific justification for machine learning, I think the applications that we'll find in machine learning will be an order of magnitude bigger, at least, if not more than that. I think if we can get this right, this is a very significant uh, uh, expansion or extension of the business applications that we have today. So the principle, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, there is a scientific justification. We've built it over the last 10 years or so. first a set of instrumentation, and now we're looking at business applications over the last 5 years. So that's where we are now. All of this exists. None of this is a dream. It's not on paper. It actually has been built and is in production. The key point that I want to make, just a couple points before we go in, is with scientific machine learning, the key point in when you formulate this correctly, express it correctly, is that it's entirely solvable. It's entirely deductive. There are no estimates. There are no models. It's all pure. It's just pure deductive math, and not particularly complicated mathematics either. So this is solvability is the key point, and what we learn immediately once it's solvable, and we start looking at time series. So immediately, by the way, the scientific machine learning extends to time series. So already an improvement over pattern recognition, and that time series, when you put it through the measuring equipment, you see that nearly every time series that you can put in, there's energy either entering or exiting the system. It's nowhere close to statistical equilibrium. Okay, so that's just a fact. It doesn't make statistics incorrect. It just means that for this data, for this time series data, a statistical analysis means statistical assumptions, and this data is not behaving statistically. So we want to explore that. We want to see in this talk, how far can we go, right? What is the possible business applications, and how does this extend beyond what is conventional machine learning? So let's carry on. I think that's everything I want to say about that. So here's the key point, where this all comes from. Now, I am a mathematician, but I really, in business anyway, I want to see as little mathematics as possible. I want to see an application that's fit for human use, not for science, no, not for but specifically for human users and business users. Now, in order to do that, what we look at is what humans do particularly well, and we seem to do it better than anybody else. And that is counting. So we know how to count very well, and what the science of counting does is it implements our confidence in our counting measurements as constraints. That's the big idea. Everything follows really from that big idea that we're going to count. So what I mean is 23 refrigerators. It's exactly 23 refrigerators. It's not 23 plus or minus, right? We won't allow, no pluses or minuses are going to be allowed here. Everything is going to be in multiples of a unit. Okay. Now, refrigerators are very clear how that's a unit, but this applies also to any time series where I have a smallest unit and I'm measuring everything as multiples of that smallest unit. So let me give you an example just to make it. I think you probably intuitively understand what I'm saying, but let's try with an example. Let's say that we have a big pile of sand, and we're told we want to measure how much sand there is. And we're given an unlimited number of coffee cans, right, that we can use. They're all identically alike. And so, of course, what we start doing is we start filling up coffee cans. We make certain it's level on top, so any excess sand on top is scraped off and kept into the pile so that we don't lose it. And we just keep doing that until we have no more sand. Okay, and you look at the number of coffee cans that you have now, and that is an integer number. Now, of course, there may be a little bit of sand left over, right? And that sand is not unknowable. That sand is just unmeasurable because it's smaller than what my unit of coffee can is, right? So if I want less sand, possible residual sand left over, well, then I just switch from coffee cans to soup cans, right? Do the exact same thing. Again, get an integer number, and that integer number is what we want. Now, you don't have to change your time series. So just to be clear about time series, what we're talking about time series here is a timestamp and a value. Okay. We don't have a space-time here. We don't allow space-time here. Space doesn't really make sense in business, and we don't have time either. What we have really is a unit of time, and that's what we're going to use in our time series. So what we're doing is so this is our theory of measurement. This is how measurement works. It applies for any time series. You don't have to truncate it at what your unit is, right? We don't need to know exactly what your unit is. You just need to know that there is a unit there, and you don't need to cut from that unit. You don't need to truncate it. So all your data is exactly, your time series data is untouched. It works in exactly the way you have it. And so this allows us to remove a lot of the gratuitous mathematics that we've now find in business. So as I've mentioned, so the science this is in fact is not not a new idea. This in fact was the basic idea in the 19th century. In the Industrial Revolution, electronics is based on the science of counting. Thermodynamics is based on the science of counting. Physical chemistry is based on the science of counting, and was in fact perfected by J. Willard Gibbs, who came up with this formalism. By the way, just a quick on Gibbs, in case you don't know this, Einstein was once asked a couple of years before he died, in 1955, this was in the US, and he was asked, who's the smartest guy you've ever met, right? And Einstein answered, well, I'd put Gibbs at the top of the list, except I never met him, right? So he was disqualified for that reason. But so Gibbs he's worked this all out for us, right? So all we have to do is just kind of follow with the science of counting. Now, in the science of counting, as I mentioned, it's exactly solvable. So there are a set of measurements that we can produce from the time series, and all the values for energy, temperature, it's essentially a thermodynamic decomposition. All of those answers are exact. Okay? No error bars. We're not introducing any models. There are no parameters. There are no biases. There's no model development life cycle. So everything now is become much more, you can reach it now. You can get to it. You don't need to create a data scientist team in order to be able to get these measurements. Now, of course, this is no models, so this is entirely independent of asset or the type series, the vertical, the horizontals, the segmentation. All of this works in exactly the same way. So very, very general. Okay. Now, the point here is that we want to build trust with the business. Essentially, this is just a calculator. It's a glorified calculator. You don't question when you put 6 times 6 is equal to 36. You don't question it. You don't need to understand how the calculator works in detail. All you need to know is the answer. This works in very much the same way. You send up the time series in a very simple format up to the cloud, right? This is actually behind AWS security infrastructure, so it's not open to anyone to come in. But you upload your time series, and then immediately, it takes, I mean, this is still machine learning, right? There's still a lot of calculation. So it might take a minute or two, but then you'll come back and you'll have a complete set of measurements that you can use to make business decisions, is the objective of this. So it's really just, it's very much like a calculator. So we're going to focus, there are a lot of measurements. I mentioned there's a thermodynamic decomposition. We definitely don't want to go into in those details, completely unnecessary. All we actually need are just two measurements that are the easiest to integrate it into whatever analytical process you have now, which is the probability distribution and the demand distribution. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at now. So let me just stop for a moment and make certain that you're all with me, or that there aren't any questions. Okay. Sounds okay. Good. But when you do, feel free to put them into chat, and we'll get back to them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to focus on the probability and the demand distribution functions. Okay, and they're pretty extraordinary. Remember, this is based on what you count, right? And what we've done in the science of counting is those answers, what you've counted, we enforce those as constraints on whatever on the science of counting. So what we're essentially saying, we could look at any theory in principle, so long as it agrees exactly with your counting measurements. Right? We won't accept any other theory if it doesn't agree exactly with your counting measurements. As it turns out, it's unique. There's only one. So that's why I say this whole thing is deductive. All right, let's look at the probability distribution. So we'll take some time here. I think it's worth you understanding what there is here in order to understand the applications that we'll be able to apply this to later. All right, so we're only going to focus on one thing at the moment, which is the red curve. That is the probability distribution. Okay. Notice that it's not a line, right? Nor would you expect it to be a line, right? These should be for each unit of measure, right? Oh, so notice, first of all, let's point out a little detail here. The input data here is in the upper right-hand corner. It's the closing prices for General Electric. Just shows it because we'd all know what that is, right? And there's a red dashed line there. That's in fact the running arithmetic mean. Okay. So all of this, there's a starting date. There are no moving windows here, right? This is essentially the same as the expected profit and loss calculation. So you have to have a starting date. Okay. So we're just adding more and more data to this time series. Now, the probability distribution, the red that you see, the red dotted distribution, discrete distribution, is the probability distribution for the far right-hand edge of all that time series. So I've consumed all the time series. I'm now looking at the far right-hand edge, which is my latest data point, and I'm asking what is the probability distribution at that point. And you're looking at it, the red discrete line. Notice that the right-hand edge, this is a double layer. Sorry, this is a two-scale graph. Notice that I have probability on the right-hand side, and I have the expected demand on the left-hand side. Don't let that throw you off. And then notice also that the origin here is, in fact, that is the average, the arithmetic mean that I mentioned. So that the origin here, and as it turns out, if you look at the figure, the insert figure, it's 64.03. Okay, so I'm starting with 64.03 is where, in fact, equilibrium is, right? And just as likely to go up as to go down, right, is what I mean by equilibrium. And that's at the average. And we can see that we're well away from equilibrium. We're 14 units, 0.03 units away, or 14 units away from an average. And okay, so this is for each unit.
I just did it.
Pardon me?
Okay.
Is there a question?
All right, thanks. Bye.
Okay. No question? Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
Mark, there is a
Yes.
question. This is from Charles Nuno. He's asking, isn't this similar to pattern formation predictions suggested by Mandelbrot's fractals?
Interesting. I mean, so I'm very interested in that area too. In fact, I mean, Mandelbrot was at Citigroup when Edmundo and I were there. And so I did look at a lot of what Mandelbrot did for risk. And and that was more on he had a fractal kind of extrapolation, is what he did. And so I would say that this may have a relationship to Mandelbrot, but I think this is much simpler at this point. These are there. I don't see a fractional dimension in this, right? In fact, I don't see any. This is zero dimensional, right? So I'm not really sure where the fractal dimension would come from. I have seen recently people are starting to allow integer dimensions as being fractals, but I don't have any comment. Um, so I'm sorry, you won the book, but I'm afraid I don't have a better answer to your question at this point on fractals. Okay, but we can talk about it some more. I'm happy to talk about it some more. So this is really zero dimensional, right? All of these things are points, right? So and now you can see, so I have a probability associated with each unit. If I multiply now the unit that I'm looking for, the number of multiple units from the average, and at that particular unit, I now multiply it by the probability right above it, right? That will give you the demand curve. Okay. So the blue curve is the expected demand curve. Okay. And I'll explain a little more about that in a moment. But let me just tell you that the probability distribution function changes very subtly. If you take a different time series, it will look very, very similar, right? But the differences here really make a huge difference in what the demand. Clearly, we're using the probability distribution to create that expected demand. And with different probability distributions, you see quite different expected demands. So uh, you really have to take that probability distribution and use it against something to really see what it's trying to tell you. All right. So we've spoken, I think, about the probability. Other comments I'll make. This probability distribution as well. Notice it's not the area under the curve adds up to one. It's each of these probabilities values added up to infinity. They have to add up to one. Okay. And all of these things are expressed functionally, right? So I can actually do that infinite sum analytically and come up with the answer one. I'll also point out one other thing with this exactness in probabilities is that I can define the 99.9 percentile region, right? What is exactly, right? I'm telling you exactly how far out if I wanted that degree of uh, what do I want to say? I want to cut off the long tail, right? I can cut it off very surgically, right? Knowing exactly what the probability is where I cut it. Okay, so those are other comments we can make. I'll also mention that when I mentioned earlier on that what makes the time series non-statistical is that there's energy entering and exiting the time series that we can measure. The demand, when there's no energy entering into the system, the demand becomes, or the expected demand becomes the expected value. It reduces to what we're familiar with in statistical mechanics. And the supply, in fact, also when there's no energy entering into or out of the market, that supply becomes the strain. Okay, so all of these things reduce to statistics, right? Correctly, we make certain that statistics is valid wherever it's meant to be valid. It's valid, but we also now can extend beyond that and look at more complicated time series. Okay, so again, the demand and supply, when the energy is equal to zero, it reduces to the expected value and the strain. But in general, those are not the natural coordinates are demand and supply. All right. So I finished with explaining the left-hand side of the plot. Any questions on that? Okay, sounds okay then. So now here's something else that's very interesting and critical to our analysis. The reason, things are solvable not just by accident, right? Things are solvable usually for a very, very good reason, right? And it turns out here the reason is very clear, is that time series defines a variational problem, the science of counting. It defines a geometry, right? That's why we're getting exact answers, is because the geometry is specified here. So, in fact, if you look at this equation, I'm sorry for the equation, but I think you'll see why I'm including it. You can see that this is forecasting. So P is the momentum. That would be my probability distribution. And what I'm saying is, how am I relating at a particular step I? How do I figure out what the probability is at the next step? And then the next step after that, and then the next step after that. So forecasting of what that probability should be. Okay. I'll point out some of you who will probably notice this and say, well, look, that looks a lot like the types of things that Bellman does in AI, where I'm looking at dynamical programming. Okay, well, that's true. So dynamical programming means that you make a more complicated problem, you embed smaller, easier problems inside it, and it's considered an algorithmic paradigm, right? Okay, well, this satisfies that paradigm, but it doesn't come because it's an algorithmic it's because it's an algorithmic paradigm. It comes about because it's geometry, and this is how geometry works, right? And by the way, the A here is that the time series will calculate for you. That's called the connection. And what the connection does is it tells you how different points, right, are connected to each other geometrically. In fact, if you were to take the derivative, or technically the covariant derivative of A, of the connection, that defines the curvature. Okay? So we have, without introducing space-time, anything like that, just keeping it to what our data, our business data actually looks like, we can talk about the curvature and the connection of the time series. Okay, and define the future forecasted dynamics of this. Okay, so those are the two key kind of takeaways. I'd say the most important takeaways from scientific machine learning. Let me just refresh.
Mark,
Yes.
Charles has another question. How
Great.
do you treat uncertainty in the real world time series against a probability curve?
Uncertainty in a time series. I'm assuming right from the beginning, no uncertainty in time series. We're counting. That's the crucial point, right? This is a different calculation than what we're accustomed to trying to include infinities, infinitely small, and we're not going to go that direction. We're going to design something that is made for humans that count and that we count exactly. Again, 23 refrigerators, exactly. Okay? All right. Thank you. So here's just to summarize what we're discovering right now, what the time series, just giving me time series and scientific machine learning, which learns from that time series, right? What have we found that we could calculate? Well, we can calculate the exact probability distribution and the demand distribution, okay, as we've seen on the left. We can measure the energy that enters into or comes out of the system. I call that displacement energy. So if it's mechanical, if it's mechanics, it has a constant energy. This is energy added to the system that moves us away from mechanics. Okay. Also statistical mechanics. We've shown that the time series, or we've claimed that the time series also calculates the connection that tells me all about the geometry of the time series, including the curvature. And and when we have an exact trajectory, okay, which is the x, I didn't mention this too when I spoke about the connection, but the connection needs one thing. It needs a direction. Tell me which direction you go, and I will tell you then whether or not the if I move in that direction, whether or not things will twist, right? That's really what the connection is telling you, is how things twist away from the direction you're moving in, okay? And there are directions where that we'll see in a moment where things don't twist, right? And those are significant. Those are significant. They're in fact optimization trajectories. Okay, so time series using scientific machine learning, there's a lot that you can calculate exactly without any error bars whatsoever. Okay, of course I'm ignoring machine error, right? That's much smaller than no, we're not talking about that. Okay, so let's move on. And now that we've seen what types of things we can do, in the scientific machine learning, what types of applications? What does this do to applications that we're familiar with already? We know how to calculate a lot of this already. So how giving me an exact probability distribution, um, how does that change things? Well, the most significant thing is to see is that, look, that probability distribution is not Gaussian. It's not a bell curve, right? It's just nothing like that. So one thing that you could do immediately is just take the exactly calculated probability distribution and substitute that in for whatever probability distribution you're using in your software. And software usually allows you to put in custom probability distribution, so you shouldn't have any problem doing that, right? And then see what this probability distribution actually tells you. So let's look at a few applications here. I'm not sure if these are the types of things that you are personally interested in. I hope they are, but that's I've tried to choose things that you would be interested in. So for all of these, so we're going to look at loans, real estate, and wealth management. All of those can be thought of as a product themselves. So we can, of course, calculate the demand on loans and the value associated with those loans. We can calculate that for all of these products. For loans, real estate, and wealth management, look at them as products and then say, what is the demand for this product? Okay. We actually have a specific example. I'll do demand in some detail, looking at coffee pods, the sales figures for coffee pods that I got from Keurig. Okay. So this is so that will come up. The demand distributions, we'll look at that in a little more detail. But let's look at loans and say, well, look, I could also count the defaults, the number of defaults and how big those defaults are, right? And I can calculate that probability, the PD, right? The probability of default, I can calculate that exactly, right? Which is pretty extraordinary, right? We should be able to do something with that. And calculate then, instead of demand distributions, I can calculate my loss distributions and use that as to, once I have a picture of what the environment, what the risk is, right? I can now look at risk mitigation strategies. Things like the hand rule can be applied here to figure out whether or not, if I spend a certain amount of money, I can maybe make one of these risks go away or mitigate it. And as the hand rule shows us how to do. The learned
Mark,
hand rule, by the way, learned hand, right?
Mark,
Go.
when you're looking at loans, are you analyzing each and every single loan in the portfolio?
Good question. That's what I was. Yeah. So it's not the individual portfolio. It's how it's segmented. Okay. So I can look at a class of loans, maybe from a particular region, for instance, right? And we actually don't need a lot of data here for to in order to. I mentioned everything here is calculated exactly, right? But if I have very, very little data, right, then I'm going to have large fractional fluctuations from one data point to another data point. So if I had four data points and now I add a fifth, right, I'm going to have big fluctuation. But if I have only 100 loans in this case for this example, the fractional fluctuations are in the third decimal place, right? 0.005. And usually all the action is happening in the first two decimal places. So the right way to look at this is not to look at an individual loan, but at segments of loans, metadata associated with the loans. And I can go to uh, very, very refined segmentation. If this were statistics, of course, I need a lot of data, right? I need thousands of loans to be able to do a statistical analysis. Here you don't. You only need 100. Okay, so uh, the answer to your question, Edmundo, is that we're looking at groups of loans and that we can go to fine detail in those groups of loans. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, uh, and and here's the major point here, when which is almost too good to be true, is if you carry this all the way through, and this is in fact I've been saying this for 10 years. I mentioned this to Citigroup as well, but this was maybe a little. Uh, 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 well, they couldn't imagine going to the regulators and saying, look, we've done the math and it looks like our allocated capital reserves are too big, right? We can reduce them, right? And and so that conversation with the regulators obviously would be a difficult one. But the point that I want to make here is this is all based on math, right? So this is not asking for, it's not that I have a particularly good model for this. It's I'm doing the math. And so I think there's actually a potential, right, to reduce our capital reserves using the correct math. So it's a that's ultimately where I think this is going. All right. So that's loans. Let me look at real estate here. There's another, these are uh, in real estate, what we're looking at is we're looking at a different we're looking at a different problem. We're looking at here are for particular metadata, particular region, particular type of property. We look at those time series and we ask for this particular region or this particular class, what is the inventory level that I should have in order to address the demand that I'm measuring in my time series? Okay, so these are allocation problems. The inventory is a special allocation problems, but the big difference here is that we have an exact probability distribution. And usually what people have been putting in here is for their probability distributions is something statistical. So this is a very significant, this includes, just to point out a few things, it requires a little more than the time series. It also requires the cost to put a unit on the shelf or to put on the shelf, for real estate to put on the market, I guess is what I want to say. And so the cost of putting something on the market and also a penalty cost if you run out of inventory and you to essentially to backfill. So there is a penalty for that. You take both of those and also the discount ratio for the price of money. This is what gives you an exact level for the inventory. Okay, so
Mark,
yes,
Charles has another question.
please.
Isn't the math subject to a time series beginning after a cataclysmic financial event? That is, 2008 financial debacle, not simple black swans.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's interesting about black swans, right, with Taleb is, notice that this is not a normal distribution anymore, right? It's a different distribution that's getting pushed out towards uh, you know, being pushed out from from uh, uh, from uh, from equilibrium, right? So we have a thickening of the distribution automatically, right? It's already covering that. So that has to do with the black swan. I don't think you need to wait to measure things from a cataclysmic event. I think you can measure things from any time you're at equilibrium. And we'll actually see that in action in the next slide. So I think that's really what all you need is, and you could even start, off of equilibrium. But I think there are some assumptions that you have to make. It's easier if you start at equilibrium and say, what is the optimal uh, policy that I can use, which we'll come to in just a moment. Okay, I hope that's
Yeah,
okay.
that's kind of like a similar question, that insurance companies would have after a catastrophic risk, right? How to do the risk management analysis in terms of what their exposure would be,
It'd be better to do it before,
right?
right? And that's what we're trying to get to is so these calculations, but I don't think it requires kind of resetting the clock,
Right.
right, so to speak, with a cataclysmic event. I don't think it needs to come to that. Okay, so inventory levels, I mentioned this is actually a lot of this is due to Richard Bellman. Again, dynamical programming in the 50s. They had this, largely figured out, except they didn't have the geometry, right? That's what we're bringing. We're bringing Bellman with the geometry that's coming out of the time series, and that's what allows us uh, 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 to complete these calculations. I also find, with real estate, the other thing is, we could also, uh, this might be the right means to look at public interest value as well. So things that are not necessarily bought, buy low, sell high, right? Like you might usually do with public interest value. Of course, you're interested in, uh, like parks or open spaces or uh, 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 historical uh, 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 historical properties. Okay, so that's also, I think this could allow us a means of valuing public interest properties, real estate that we're looking at seriously with a partner. Then I want to look at one other example here, which is wealth management. This one's pretty interesting. We're running out of time a little bit here. This one's interesting in that right now people are saying consumption and savings are so complex that you have to use supercomputers and even quantum computers to solve these problems. We don't think that's true. I don't think that's right at all. I think we can do it with much less calculation than that for portfolio optimization. Okay, let me move a little quickly. I just want to say when we move away from statistics, what we see in the previous slides here is that we're going to see a lot more detail. Now, statistics washes things out, so you miss a lot of that detail. It also doesn't, statistical equilibrium means you don't really see dynamics, right? Now we can see dynamics, and we can take decisions as well. So detailed dynamics and decisions, that's what moving away from statistics allows us to see more clearly. The optimal policy here, this is straight from, this is the same idea as Bellman. Uh, so I've already mentioned that our forecasting of the probability distribution is a form of dynamic programming. So it's consistent with what we're doing here with an optimal policy. And what we're identifying is the eigenvector here, this blue line here is the eigenvector for this geometrical problem. And what that means is that's going to be, if I move in that direction, I'm going to keep moving in that direction. Right? So you can think of it a little bit like a geodesic, right? It just keeps moving in a straight line. And the significance of this is if you can move on this line, then it's giving you the greatest percentage increase for the least energy expenditure. Okay? So that's that we can calculate that. Now, that's not to say, of course, that you have to use least energy, right? Your budget may be bigger, right? But this is what you would need to do, the minimum amount of energy you would need in order to get the greatest increase. The important thing that we can do, because everything is calculated here, even if this orange arrow is something that I kind of choose arbitrarily, as soon as I move to that, I see that data point, I can now calculate how much energy is needed in order to get up to the optimal curve, right? So I can build that optimal policy that gives me the greatest percentage increase for the least energy. Okay, you can also see how mechanics and statistical mechanics and the optimal solution are related to each other, right? Which I think is enlightening. All right, let's go further. Now I want to go to the coffee pod sales. And what you're seeing here, that blue line that I just pointed out, that optimal path, right? Well, that's the blue dashed line here. Okay, so I took the coffee pod sales, right? This is weekly coffee pod sales in units of 100,000. So one is 100,000 here. And the black curve, that's the data. We're just plotting the data. The green dashed is the arithmetic mean again, this time for this data. And I've added the blue eigenvector, or that zero curvature direction, that zero curvature path. And I'll explain the red in just a moment. But you'll see that's the blue. And the one thing that is an absolute disaster for us in this time series is whenever you go below the average, right? Whenever you go below the average, that's terrible. And you're worse. You're performing worse than statistics. And on the other, and when you're below that green dashed line, the probability that you'll go further down, right, increases, right? So it's like you're in mud and you have to dig yourself out of that. So really, what we want to do is never go below that green dashed line. Okay. If you can, whatever you can do, stay above that. Now, we can do that if we follow the blue line. If we were operationally able to follow that blue dashed line, you can see this is the greatest increase for the least energy spent, and it keeps me above statistical equilibrium always, right? Which is what we want. Okay, so now let's explain this red curve here. This is the actual data plotting the demand. And when you plot the demand, you'll see spikes coming out of this, but you'll see this very clear linear path, right? So this is in fact when the strain is at its maximum. Okay, and anything beyond this is now just going to dissipation and is not, it's really wasted energy. So this is an example of what I would say if you've got your budget is bigger than what you have for the optimal path, the dashed blue, then you can empirically figure out what is the slope. So this is all empirical data that came straight from the data. We're not calculating anything, but you can see that slope of these triangular paths, and I reproduce them in the lower left-hand corner. You'll see where I tell you what the slopes are for these, and based on those slopes, now you can go ahead and forecast what you anticipate even when I move away from the optimal from the optimal policy, how much uh, uh, I expect in sales increase. And these numbers are pretty big. I mean, they're all above six, right? These are very impressive numbers. All right. So that's the any questions on this? Okay, let me go to kind of finishing this up now a little bit. So this is where we are. The first thing to do, the first thing that we did, first 5 years from we founded in 2015, and just as COVID hit, we had finished a complete set of measuring equipment. So we have measuring equipment for binary states. So I have two states, up and down. That usually works very well for financial markets. We also did units. So as I mentioned with the coffee cans and soup cans, those units of measure, we have all of those, and you can do them 25 at a time, right? So if you have the same time series, but for different values, that's fine. We encourage that. We encourage that analysis. We also calculate the probability distributions, as I mentioned. The interaction here, we can take two time series and talk about the interaction between those two time series. I didn't mention it here because we didn't have the time to do that as well. And also forecasted paths. Our approach here is a little bit like ballistic targeting or ranging, right? Where we fire for a given particular direction. What is that path that will follow? And you can then choose which path you think is closest to what you want to do from a business perspective. These are all the measuring equipment. What we have sitting on top of that is decision machine, which will be another set of products, but generally ones that I'm running. Right? These are for consulting engagements. This is what we make business decisions based on. So inventory levels, all the examples that I gave, in fact, for loans, real estate, and wealth management, those are all decision machine calculations that are based on the underlying measurements. All right, so how are we doing? I think we should be close. Yeah. Okay. Well, we did have an opportunity to ask questions along the way, but I can also, 3 minutes. I do have a summary here, takeaways, which I think this will be posted, so you could perhaps go through this in detail. Let me give the rest of time to any questions that you might have. Any questions? Did this make sense? Is this helpful? Has this been helpful? Do you see what we're doing with scientific machine learning? Oh, here, there's some chats here. Let's see if maybe.
The Pascal has a comment.
Great.
Thank you so much. Interesting presentation that challenges my math level. I believe this is why we're lucky to have professionals like you. I will have to see the recording again.
Great. Well,
But
thank you.
the most
And one of the
important
things,
thing, Mark, that I think for your presentation that the people need to understand is the first bullet that you have in that slide about, business is about counting what counts.
it is. That's right. And it's counting, and it's also your taste in counting. What you're counting,
Yeah.
right, is obviously really important too. You don't just count anything. But I think most anything that we want to, I think we're already counting anything that's already of interest to us.
Yeah, Charles has another question. How does black box learning deal with weather, wars, assassinations, floods, famines, other acts of God, exchange, supply shifts, and stupidity? I think the best was stupidity. Wait.
Well, I think I understand. Yeah. So there is something that we do in engagements, which is to perturb, right? So, say that there are, for an inventory level, I'll give as an example. This is what we actually do. Always check to see, well, what happens to the prediction if all of a sudden I were to add 40 products were bought today, right, and cleared me out entirely. What are those? What's the impact of those events on the probability distribution? Okay, so I mean, obviously, it can't know something that hasn't happened yet, right? Although it could say that there are by thickening the tail, right, as we've seen it can do, it makes some of these what we call uh, you know, tail phenomena, much closer than we imagine.
Yeah, he just says think tariffs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's
And that thing has been up and down, it's totally unpredictable because it's based on whims, right?
based on winds.
Yeah, whims.
Oh,
However,
oh, of course.
someone in the
What
White House wakes
what you
up.
know about, right? What you know about, Ryan, right? Yeah, no, that's true, and that's that could be. There's some things you can do around hidden variables around that. But my point is really to try to eliminate as much of the math as possible. I don't want any gratuitous math here. I want this to be just what we need tailored to business and to humans without anything additional. So I would try to avoid introducing hidden variables. So let me just see some of these other questions. Ooh, prediction suggested by Mandelbrot. Fully documented, or does it include? Okay, I think shifting China demand, think tariffs. Okay, I think we answered. I think we answered the questions mostly along as we went along. So that's fine. So I mean, what I would recommend here, actually, as I say, this doesn't require a data science team. If you, what we've been suggesting, right, is that is to find out about your own time series. So if there's a young professional who's not scared of technology, but very promising professional, they might consider organizing some of your time series and analyzing it, looking at the measurements and seeing what you get and what the opportunity is. So that can be done very inexpensively. So.
Well, I think you gave those good examples, which is, uh, banking, wealth management, and real estate.
Yeah. There's a lot of interest in real estate, I have to say. People, all of the other two I actually know quite a lot about. We've done a lot of work in that area. But real estate is one that seems to be very popular.
How about insurance, Dr. Temple Austin? How do you feel about insurance? Because the predictability of insurance is a function now of real estate.
Yeah, no, I mean, we think yes, and we the issue I have with insurance is that it's all statistical, right? So when we've spoken to insurance companies in the past, right, I've maybe this wasn't the most delicate way to say it. I was trying to say it delicately, but I said that they're operating with an astigmatism, right? They're not seeing things very clearly because of this statistical assumption. And understanding it in more detail is statistical assumptions are costing you money, right? It's not like they're the most frugal probability distribution to use. They're the most expensive. So anything will be better than a statistical analysis. Now, of course, if the data is actually behaving statistically, then then all the analysis is correct. Okay, so I think I hope I'm not keeping anybody now. We're a little 5 minutes past. I'm happy to answer as many questions as you like. And you can write to me also personally if you have some questions would you like me to give a little more thought to the answer.
All right, Mark. Thank you very much, and thank you to all who attended.
Thank you. Nice meeting you. Okay.